Hey everybody, this is Small Group Summaries with Scott, and we are finishing up a theme that we started called Faith in an Anxious World. The first week we talked about, well, what is the anxiety that we're all dealing with? You know, right now it's obviously the pandemic, and there's so many other things that we're struggling with. Then week 2 we talked about the connections that we have with people that can help us when times are tough. And then last week we talked about the difficult topic of depression and suicide, and making sure once again that you're connected and reaching out for help, just as people reached out to Jesus for help, that we need when we're in a dark place, not to isolate ourselves, but to reach out to others for help. So this week our theme is life in a hopeful world. So we took our story from Mark chapter 6, verses 30 to 44. So let me read this to you. It says, the apostles returned to Jesus and told him everything they had done and taught. Many people were coming and going, so there was no time to eat. He said to the apostles, come by yourselves to a secluded place and rest for a while. They departed in a boat by themselves for a deserted place. Many people saw them leaving and recognized them, so they ran ahead from all the cities and arrived before them. When Jesus arrived and saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Then he began to teach them many things. Late in the day, his disciples came to him and said, this is an isolated place and it's already late in the day. Send them away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy something to eat for themselves. And he replied, you give them something to eat. But they said to him, should we go off and buy bread worth almost 8 months' pay and give it to them to eat? And he said to them, well, how much bread do you have? Take a look. After checking, they said 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He directed the disciples to seat all the people in groups as though they were having a banquet on the green grass. They sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties and took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up to heaven, blessed them, broke the loaves into pieces, and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. Everyone ate until they were full. They filled 12 baskets with the leftover pieces of bread and fish. About 5,000 had eaten. So, often we refer to this story as Jesus feeding the 5,000, but what's interesting is if we look a little bit more closely, it becomes clear that Jesus isn't planning to help those on his own. He's going to work through his very tired and hungry and imperfect disciples. So Jesus could have, if he wanted to, have turned, we know that he could have turned all the rocks probably laying around into bread. He could have done a miracle and everyone could have been dependent on him and him only. But instead he empowered the disciples and he used them and he challenged them and pushed them to come up with a solution here. So how anxious do you think the disciples must have felt when Jesus threw out the problem to them? They probably were pretty anxious. So with that, think about this. Why doesn't Jesus just feed the crowd himself? He doesn't. He doesn't do that. Instead, he empowers the disciples. Jesus' strategy to spread his message and miracles included teaching us to do what he did and gifting us with the Holy Spirit. The disciples were being equipped to go and do what Jesus did, helping others to know and experience his peace as well. So I want you to understand that just as Jesus used the disciples here, he's empowered us too. I think it's in the Gospel of John, it says that we are empowered to do even greater things than Jesus. So Jesus could have stayed here on this earth and done everything for us, and we would just be passive participants and not do anything and just watch Jesus do everything. But instead, Jesus empowered the church and his disciples and us to do what he did in helping others and serving others and doing incredible things. So here's a question. How do you think Jesus' followers felt differently about their anxiety after the meal? They probably were on a spiritual high. They probably felt really good and just realized, Jesus used them to do some miraculous stuff. So if you were a part of the crowd that day, what hopes would you have about following Jesus after seeing him create a seemingly endless supply of bread and fish? I'm sure the people were just amazed and blown away too. So a couple of things I want you guys to understand here is that Jesus didn't ask for perfection from his disciples. What he needed was their trust. He wanted them just to trust him to do some miraculous stuff. They didn't have to be perfect. They didn't have to know everything that the Bible said. They didn't have to have read through the Bible or anything like that. They just needed to trust Jesus. So a couple things I want you to get here before we wrap this up is that I want you to understand you were created in God's image. And you were made to know God. And we were made to be connected with others. So those are important things to understand. That we reflect God. We reflect the mission of Jesus Christ and who we are and how we act. And so we are here to bring hope to a hopeless world. A world that's riddled with anxiety and other problems. As a church, we are supposed to not add to the problems. We're supposed to offer the opportunity for hope to the hopeless. So consider that. Consider that. And we had a great discussion as a youth group of just understanding that we are messengers of God's hope to a lost world. So 3 things that we've touched on in every one of these lessons is to reflect, recenter, and reconnect. So we want to reflect on the fact that we are made in God's image, and that's really important to understand. That should be our primary identity. Then we want to recenter by spending time with God. We need to make sure that we're centered in understanding who we are, what we are, how God has created us, and just make sure that we understand our primary identity is in being a child of God. And then thirdly, reconnect with our circle. We provide hope when we come together, when we're here, when we're leaning on each other's shoulders, when we're praying for each other. There's hope in that. There's hope in that. So I know it's hard for some of you as we're in a pandemic to feel that. For some it's starting to feel hopeless, but believe me, there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel, and we will be back together soon. But know this, that we love you, we care about you, and we're thinking about you, and we're praying for you. And there's a lot of good reasons to have hope in our faith, have hope in the church and what Jesus is doing in and through us. And just know that we will overcome our anxiety, our fears, and all that we're going through, and being able to be vessels of God's hope to a lost world. So thank you, and we'll see you next week. Bye.